I'm Joel Hicks. I'm the chair of the Climate Action Committee, the Borough of Carlisle. I call this informational meeting to order. We do not have a quorum to approve any agenda items, and all information passed and all activities from the committee will be considered informational only. We will proceed and skip our one action item to approve the September 15th, 2022 minutes. Are there any comments from the public online? Seeing none, we'll move on to updates from the chair. I just wanted to update the group on the data collection and processing of our local government ops greenhouse gas inventory. It's moving along swimmingly. We have 3 different groups kind of doing an independent assessment of all of our municipal operations, which, as a reminder, include the effective emissions as a result of building and facilities, energy usage, all of our street lights and lighting, our vehicle fleet emissions, including things like our police and public works fleets, even our off-road emissions sources, all of our scope 3 emissions coming from our commuter survey that we had a substantial, an adequate number of survey responses to complete that portion of our inventory. And then we will also count for the public sector's contribution to our solid waste emissions from, in our case, our landfill, and also from our compost site. So that will be a footprint that will help us inform our municipal ops plan, which I will foreshadow here on behalf of our sustainability director, Jared Woolston, who will brief next Climate Action Committee meeting in November his strategy for completing the municipal ops plan for next year. And we look forward that we will be voting to add that as a focus area for this body's work. But we will look forward to hearing Jared's brief next meeting. And probably a good thing is we'll have, I think, some close to a final inventory of exactly the emissions that we're trying to mitigate. So the timing works out really well there. So that's the update. Look forward to getting something close to a final, certainly by November, close to a final draft, and then hopefully by December we will have something we would consider an official version of our local government ops greenhouse gas inventory. And actually, I will take the liberty of adjusting the agenda here to come back to the issue tracker and yield the next item to our resident at large member of the executive committee, Tamala Trussell. She will be presenting the result of a final draft recommendation that we will deliberate and possibly be ready to vote on next November. I have reviewed her draft work and am confident it comports with the elements that we think are important to include when we make recommendations to council and to the steering committee. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Tamala for her overview of the basis for her recommendation. Tamala?
All right, well, thank you so much, Joel, and thank you, committee members, for having me here today to share with you about the strategic summary for reduction of single-use plastic bags. So we'll be going over the problem definition at hand and its relationship to the state and climate action plans and goals. We will discuss about the relationship with the community and how it impacts them, the cost, benefits, and give our recommendation, and then how we will measure the success of this plan. Oh, yay, worked. So, one of the things one of the big issues is that the cost for single-use plastic and plastic bags in general, they're all hidden. And so down to the plastic bags cost itself for the consumer, and it's incorporated in their purchases at checkout. The cost for litter, the cost for stormwater impacts and waste management are all hidden costs. There's greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to climate change, which impact infrastructure and stormwater management, all heat islands, all kinds of things like that. And just generally the plastic bags themselves, as well as the microplastics and chemicals from them, are issues to environmental and human health harms. So there are about 10 times the cost to the environment, society, and the economy are 10 times higher than the price of virgin plastic. And the environmental plastic pollution, plastic bags contribute 11.18% of all environmental plastic pollution. And for the oceans, they're the largest single-use plastic item polluting our oceans at 14.1%. So there are approximately 8 goals that we would like to meet with the bag reduction. Oops, clicking the wrong things. One is to just bring a general public awareness of the harms of single-use plastic and plastic bags to our residents and business and community as a whole. To address diversity and equity issues by this implementation, decrease litter and enhance aesthetics, decrease waste management, decrease greenhouse gas, toxic air and water pollutants, microplastics, litter, and chemicals in our watersheds, and to hopefully get our residents and businesses to transition from disposability to reuse and repair, and generally address societal costs as a whole. So for some of these goals, there's a general lack of awareness about the extent of these harms of single-use plastics and plastic bags. As you noted from the statistics earlier, they're compose a lot of the impacts. Starbuck Prairie and I, we walked the perimeter of our local parking lot while we were waiting for someone to get into the Conagwinnett Creek to go stand up paddleboarding. And within 3 feet of the parking lot, we collected this trash. Plastic bags were in that collection. So there's so much plastic litter and plastic bags that are in our communities. Some of these pictures are from New Mexico when I went back, as well as our community here. And that people become desensitized to litter and their health harms. So if plastic were an industry, it would be the fifth largest emitter of greenhouse gases. By 2040, plastics will contribute the 20% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So the other goal that we'll be addressing is the downtime and maintenance and repair for our material recovery facilities, and this is important because this will save our residents money in their waste management bills. We surveyed the residents and businesses of Carlisle Borough, and we found that the primary concerns for them were this sense of desiring the convenience, choice, equity, what are alternatives, and expense. So when you look at this picture, the pictures on the left and in the middle, everything is packaged in single-use plastic versus the right. So one of the things that studies have shown from other communities is that implementing a bag reduction ordinance changes the behaviors of residents to moving toward more sustainable actions. And this will actually increase the options and choices for our residents. So some of the things is the fossil fuel industry for decades has been leading us to move away from reuse to disposability. We were taught to dispose. It used to be a foreign thought, a concept. And so it's taken decades to get us to readily dispose of everything in our lives virtually. And so it's going to take time and education to move to reusability. And so through educating businesses and our residents, and we can show them that it is worth their effort and lifestyle changes to move to reuse. Some things that they can use are their probably plentiful Amazon boxes or stackable baskets and of course reusable bags. But if you're like me and you forget them in your car or at home, it's okay because you can just shop, put your stuff in your cart, put it on the checkout, put it back in your cart, bring it to your car, put it in the bags, or go to your home, put it in the bags to carry it in. So it's not the end of the world. It's just showing a sense of responsibility like we try to teach our own children. And then if that happens enough, I'll be likely to remember my alternative carrying items. On the left, the picture was us doing a plastic inventory about a year ago when I started Move Past Plastics. You could see the amount of plastic that my purchases accumulated versus the basket now. So this is an example of the lifestyle changes that can go beyond just the plastic bag. So far as the equity, the Carlisle Borough will be subsidizing reusable bags for those who are on WIC and SNAP and low income. And the entire plastic bag life cycle impacts frontline communities and workers negatively for their health and their lifestyle and well-being. So by reducing plastic bags, shifting the lifestyle and the consumption of single-use plastic overall, these impacts will be reduced. So we've kind of talked about some of the benefits along with goals because the goals really are going to be the benefits, right? So we haven't gotten into too much of details, but there's all of the other bag reductions that have been occurring across our country, no less around the world, have very specific, if different, tangible results that are positive. from that shifting of lifestyle change to reusable bags. These two examples are from Alameda, California, and San Jose. San Jose first, and then Alameda. So reduced bags and storm drainage, and a reduced MRF downtime, which once again will result in less waste management expenses for the community. And as we've mentioned, decrease in greenhouse gas emissions and decrease in the harms from the microplastics and chemicals. So these are some pictures of microplastics in our waterways. And this is important because polyethylene, as you heard from the earlier statistics, it composes the biggest health harm in our environment and in our oceans. Plastic bags have a very short life cycle to break down to microplastics, which are where the real harm comes in. It's 10 to 20 years. So by eliminating the plastic bags, we will be eliminating a large number of health harms that these microplastics that have a larger surface area and expose us to more chemicals, as well as absorb chemicals like PCBs, and act as vectors for invasive species and all kinds of things. A lot of that will be reduced, and so our oceans can do their job and produce oxygen and absorb more of the carbon dioxide. Even a single bacteria is being impacted that provides that there's a chemical that leaches out of plastic bags that decreases that bacteria that gives us 10% of our oxygen in our ocean. And like we mentioned earlier, the the greenhouse gas emission reduction is a definite benefit. For Carlisle's residents, approximately 20,000, a small vehicle would be able to drive 37 million, basically almost 38 million kilometers worth of greenhouse gas emission equivalent for the reduction of the plastic bags. So if you look at this slide, you can see other municipalities and their economic benefits that they gained. It's estimated that societal cost for the Society for Single-Use Plastic contributes 3.7 million, and by 2040, 7.1 million. Now, these societal costs that are figured for this dollar amount include the making of the plastic, the waste management, and the environmental impacts through ocean fisheries. It does not include the monetary impacts that are incurred for the land, terrestrial, and freshwater impacts. So, what's our recommendation? The recommendation is to have a combined bag banned with a fee. The fee is important because we don't want people to switch for paper bags to switch to paper bags because they also have an environmental impact. We want to move them away from disposability in general, and that's very important. Also, we want to be sure to give them an opportunity to understand about why this is important, and we'll do this with at least a 6-month minimum notification and public awareness campaign. We'll provide signage that will require businesses to post, and we will have a big educational outreach through social media and our community organizations and businesses. And then lastly, we'll make sure that we do a pre and post statutory impact study. So we will be able to determine if this bag reduction is successful if it has the following results. So we would like to see an 80% reduction in single-use plastic bag usage, 70% favorable attitudes for the ordinance from local businesses, residents that are disaggregated by race and income, 55% increase in reusable bags, no bags or alternative containers, 50% decrease in material facility recovery tanglers and reduction in waste management fees, 50% decrease in single-use plastic bags on our streets, 50% decrease in microplastics in water. And this is the only iffy one right here, but I'd like to see that, which means we need to test our water for microplastics. And a 40% decrease in single-use plastic bags in storm drains. The other thing with just a caveat, when I say 50% decrease reduction in microplastics in our wastewater, it is important to understand that we'll get microplastics raining down on us. So microplastics are coming from so many places other than the Carlisle borough. So that's why I probably shouldn't have included that, but it might be something that we can include just to see if there happens to be a reduction, because the air we breathe, 30% of it is microplastics. So just we can maybe scratch that and include it a little differently. So that's all I have. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
Thank you, Tamela, very much. I want to really emphasize how well Tamela has focused her recommendations, distilled an awful lot of information, both in her policy recommendation and in this presentation, to things that I think are really digestible and in a way that we can share it with others. So I really appreciate it. And I know there's tons of stuff behind everything you said. And because I know you, every ounce of restraint to bring in other information, and I applaud you. And seriously, as sort of a first action that we're potentially recommending to council, you set the bar high as someone who's, we're all going to probably be working on different things independently or as groups, but you're getting very close to where we need to be in how we're presenting and thinking through these issues. So thank you very much. I have a few comments, but maybe hold them at the end in case the mayor or Dave, you have any follow-ups you'd like with Tamela.
I have some comments and questions, but I also didn't. What I want to do before I throw those out there tonight, I'm not going to throw too much out there tonight because I reviewed it, and I didn't get a chance to click on all the links you provided, and I don't want to ask questions that are already answered if I click on some links. So I'll probably defer some of those questions and just communicate that offline. A couple of things that just during the presentation struck me for us to think about. The measuring the microplastics in the wastewater, I think is a fair thing to do. I think we just need to figure out what we're measuring it against, because there's that, like you mentioned, there's that background that we're not going to have any control over. But I think if we were to measure our either the raw water before it comes into the water plant, or the processed water as it's leaving the water plant, against what we're finding in in our wastewater that may give us some sense of.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there's some rain that falls
Yeah,
falls in between, but it might give us a better sense of kind of where we really are. And on that point, I know we've talked about PFAS
yeah,
a lot, and you're probably very aware of it. There was an article that shocked me that there's a very detectable level of PFAS on the Himalayan plateau, which lacks much, of that type of society that would produce those. So that's how ubiquitous that kind of stuff is. So
yeah, it's in the water cycle.
right, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other major question, then I'll dig into details before I jump into anything else, is sort of maybe it's more of a local issue in the surveys and discussions with the business community, whether how they budget for things and how they order. Is 6 months lead time going to be sufficient for them? You may not have an answer to that, but just something for us to think about as we go forward.
Yeah, that's a minimum lead time. So across the country, the average is about 9 months to 1 year. So I put that as a minimum, but we can, do that. I think it's reasonable to do the average. And then also it's important, I didn't include it in here because there's a lot to include, but once that lead time comes and we hold people accountable to try and follow the ordinance, there's still a recommendation for there to be a 6-month buffer before a fine is accrued, and so that buys additional time, potentially up to a year and a half out, because just warnings would be issued. So I think that's why you can push it back to that 6 months if you wanted to get this up and going,
Because effectively then it's really a year.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I put the 6 months as opposed to 9 months to a year.
Yeah. Then maybe the only other sort of large question that I had was and maybe you answer it in some of these links that I didn't get to, so I'm sorry if you did. The recommendation is just a complete ban on single-use plastic bags rather than a fee on the bags, and then a relatively sizable fee on paper bags, which, as we've discussed before, there's a significant cost to paper bags. Did you? I know you looked at a number of different jurisdictions that implemented things. Did you see a drastic difference in the drop off between those different programs that had a fee on plastic bags versus programs that just straight out banned the single-use plastic?
Yes, by combining them both, you got the best results overall of course, single-use plastic bag reduction. So the fee didn't lead to as much reduction in plastic bag use. Just the ban alone, what would happen then is, yes, you eliminated your plastic bags, but then the paper kind of ramped up. So you had that, drawback. So when you combine them, those have been the municipalities who have combined them have had the best results with both reducing single-use plastic, still avoiding harmful emissions and chemicals from the process of plastic bags, assuming they're 40% compostable. That's important too. And then and just overall moving the community to more regenerative practices instead of disposable practices. And as far as the money for all of it, as you could see through my one example of just the two in percentages, the monetary impact varied among the communities too. But I think overall, for all the benefits that I mentioned that you get, it definitely didn't cost more for the community, for the residents. It was like 2 cents per single use, or I'm sorry, it was like 2/10 of a cent per plastic bag that they would be no longer using. So it would, and then of course businesses wouldn't pay as much for the plastic bags. So overall, it was a good deal.
Yeah. Then I have one other comment, but I know you're short on time, and I want to make sure no one has any other follow up on anything we just discussed. You still have some? Yeah. Then I'll go ahead.
I just had some things to kind of overarching sort of comments with this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just throw it. One thing that I thought through, just because my family's gotten really used to, I'm going to plug Giant Direct, and I actually emailed the rep from Ahold that we met with a while back about this. I haven't gotten an answer back yet, but we wind up getting paper bags when we stop and pick those up, and I don't know how much of a shift there has been toward things like Giant Direct, where you're picking up your groceries, and what they might implement. One is very simply, I think, as you suggested you do yourself when you forget your bags, is, don't load them up in bags, just load them up in my trunk, and I'll take care of the bags when I get home.
Yeah.
It'd be a simple solution to that. But then they have to be able to obviously implement that on the ground. But that may be another challenge that we need to deal with, because then those folks who are paying, I'd be paying 12 cents on each bag unless I can sort of opt out of getting those bags that I don't necessarily want, because all we do is sort of package them up and recycle them anyway.
Right.
But that was all. It was just a comment. Thanks.
Thank you. And Tamala, understand you if you have to run. I think I don't have any questions. Not just some comments, some narrative in terms. Just a few things I want to address. Probably at the top of this, and this is a climate action committee, and so our focus is greenhouse gas mitigation measures and prioritizing those. I'll just say it's important to recognize that there are benefits to reducing our use of single-use plastics, bags, single-use plastics in general. We have not captured the term of art is those are scope 3 emissions,
Right.
Which is emissions that equate to things that are either in inflow or outflow of community usage. We did not capture these in the community nor in the LGO. I challenge you to find any city who has included their use of single-use. But point being, I'm confident that if this was to move forward and this reduction would be significant in terms of greenhouse gas reductions, it will not show up in our probably future collection, and to be honest, the possibility that it actually measurably be an increase, meaning if we have more paper bags, things that rot in our own landfills, those get measured. Things that get stuck in landfills and never decompose, or the greenhouse gas emissions that were generated at the origin, they don't show up in our inventory. So I really will make it very clear to council and everyone who's paying attention, even though I fully support this measure, is that we're going to have to rely on research and evidence that will likely not show up in our calculations, and I'm comfortable with that. But I also like to make sure we're accountable for being accurate in what we advise council in terms of what we can check in terms of a real scope 1 reduction, which this will not be. I really, personally think targeting single-use plastics in the world of plastics, I think we can have some really good discussions about the benefits of plastics in different aspects of our life.
Yeah.
I think there are some roles of plastics that we're going to be hard pressed to ever replace, but I'm very confident to say single-use plastics need to find substitutes, and I cannot think of a better target than single-use plastic bags, which from a utilitarian point of view is unquestionably the most harmful use of what I would say poor quality and poorly disposed of plastics. So I think your idea of our idea of focusing on bags first, and then learning how to extend that to other single-use plastic problems, which we have and we haven't really discussed. Plastic forks and plastic packaging. I think that's a natural next thing to engage with. And then, a fee, we're not, I think we should recognize that it would be an adjustment period, and the fact of having a fee is to me, kind of a minimal penalty for nudging us towards a change behavior. It's a balance between, I was in Washington D.C. when they started their fee system, and I did the eye roll probably 2 or 3 times at the small cost of 40 cents. That was actually enough for me to change my behavior in ways that I don't think about anymore, because it's just a response. And so I think we need to recognize that it's going to be an adjustment period, and we have a way of accommodating people who forget, and so the only other thing I would like, perhaps in parallel to getting our community engagement teams comporting with supporting their criteria, I would like to add that for the record, is perhaps if we could take your measures of impact and reach out to our Tony, our Pathways and Analytics team, and make sure it's a list of measurements that he thinks we would be in a position to verify. I think everything on that list, if we could measure, makes sense. I'm a little bit wondering if all of those will be practical, because if the cost of monitoring, if that's the only reason we're monitoring, is higher than the benefits, then even though it may be important, that may not be a specific area. I think most of those things we can measure pretty easily, and maybe when we revisit this in November, we can get that input from him on the measures and impacts. The only other thing before we close this item out, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. We're not trailblazing here as a municipality in Pennsylvania. There are at least 7 municipalities.
There are 10 now,
and probably before the
and a bunch more coming.
It's a movement of recognition of our getting increased understanding of how plastics break down and the harms, and I think also, frankly, just the realization that transferring away from single-use plastic bags is actually a manageable challenge that we can do, and I think we should feel reasonable that we can move our community in that way without disrupting producers or consumers. Wegmans has recently announced that they're moving away completely from single-use plastic bags. I might argue that most large retailers would probably love a homogenous approach, so that we're all kind of moving in the right, and we're kind of stumbling maybe towards that in state. But I have not heard from any retailers that they don't think the future is going to be getting away from single-use plastic. So I think the time is right for us to move this forward, and we'll put it back on the agenda and see where we are in terms of moving it forward to the steering committee and to council. So great work, Tamala. I really appreciate that. Let's, do one more. Anybody in public comments? I'll open it up before we go around.
Joel, I just have one quick
Yep.
comment. Just a little story. I had to take my daughter for surgery in Philly. And so while I was waiting for her, I was polling people what they thought of the new plastic reduction ordinance there. And all of them were like, yeah, like it's not a big deal. And I just like not seeing plastic on the power lines and all over the streets. So they, seemed real positive about it. And you can tell some of them were a little bit put out at first, but now that, a few months have gone past, they're just like, yeah, it just is. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. Thanks. Let's just go around for the leads, the team leads and task force leads that are here, and that will be Dave Sheridan. Floor is yours for updates, which have been substantial since the last meeting, but if you could get us up to speed, kind of where your team's at.
On last Friday, excuse me, my voice is straining a little bit. Last Friday, first I'll touch on electric vehicle and electric vehicle charging grants. Last Friday, I attended the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Grant Program meeting. This is a PennDOT program using federal money. This covers DC chargers, fast chargers, and probably is not very applicable to borough-owned properties, but very applicable to the borough sponsoring and finding locations, properties within a mile of selected interchanges on I-81 and I-76. Another grant program, the Alternative Fuels Incentive Grant, PADEP runs that, and that seems to be a grant program that would be interesting to us if we were to have borough-owned charging stations that are not otherwise available to the public. So the other grant that DEP offers is Driving PA Forward. This is a public access level 2 EV chargers. So between those two grants, Joel, you and I will be working with Susan Armstrong to decide how to proceed. And it seems as if the approach might be to seek an AFIG grant for charging stations, and then have the acquisition of the electric vehicles follow up in a future purchasing year. We've made progress with the education program. We are coordinating with the borough manager. We have sketched out a program with 3 beginning elements. One would be to explain the vehicle mile traveled reduction objective of the Climate Action Plan. The second element would be to review the rules of the road, which I understand were they were a subject of discussion a few years ago. And then the third element might be safe routes to school program, and for that, I would appreciate an introduction to the appropriate person at the school district, so that we can begin talking about this. And that's and I will be putting some dates on these three elements so we can keep the process moving along. I think I mentioned in our last meeting that we see education as by far the most important way to begin the vehicle miles traveled reduction portion of the climate action plan. Our next meeting is next Monday, and I'll have a better update on the two other programs, such as there's two other potential projects, one being the Pomfret Street Garage and the other being other borough properties on which charging stations could be installed.
Great. Thanks, David. Your team is locked into what they should be, and you guys are doing great work. I do want to make sure with the driving PA Forward, that's, as I understand it, that's a rolling sort of grant where we don't really have a timeline. I would like to make sure if we have an opportunity, because I think the deadline would be pretty short, to take advantage of the AFIG either for potential procurement of a qualifying vehicle or just charging stations, that we kind of square that away to determine when the nearest cycle would be.
The next cycle is mid-December, and
do we know what the next one would be, or maybe we don't know if it's going to be offered again? It's so December. Okay.
AFIG is a line item, a budget line item, yeah. So it will continue to be offered by DEP.
Of all the great things, I want to make sure we're kind of running the best information we have soonest on that because of that simple deadline, and I think there may be, we may not all, borough staff and us, may not be understanding what the requirements are to be eligible and how that fits into our future plans. Which I think we can do that. We can do that, but it's probably something we need to square away in the next few weeks. For instance, we had the vehicle turnover. Because we're doing the greenhouse gas inventory, we got a complete list of vehicles. Even my students, compared to like some of the known replacements we're doing, there were still some older vehicles out there that it's not clear whether they're just going to go away or, oh yeah, there's one more vehicle we plan to replace, which is important because in the class 1 and 2 vehicles, it's a pretty low bar to getting a grant. So I just want to make sure we're not missing a very obvious opportunity to take advantage of.
Yes, the 2 vehicle matter deals with the charging stations, not with the vehicles. So, as you know, the Adams County group that's been asking, do you need help to put this AFIG grant together, is suggesting that we start with the charging station even without the fleet of 2 vehicles, because the charging station has a 24-month duration where the vehicle purchase has only a 12-month duration. So
this is a very, Mr. Mayor, this is a very significant thing, and you just be curious to know what the other element of this that I think is relevant is, to what extent do we have to use those charging stations for other purposes? Once we have them in place, Is there language that says they can only be used for public vehicles?
That's the next step. If the borough were to put in a charging station that is accessible only to the borough fleet of electric vehicles, that should be that would be the subject of an AFIG grant. If it's to be a open to the public, that's a driving PA forward grant.
Okay, so you are confident that the use of an AFIG charging station can only be used for public vehicles.
I have to clarify that with Carolyn.
Okay.
Carolyn Ryan, with whom I've been communicating.
Yeah.
But
by the way, we
think that's correct.
We need to draft. I need to draft a thank you letter that the mayor. I think will be willing. We've had some advocates who are interested in helping with the energy transition who are going out of their way to help the task force write grant, which is applaudable, and I want to make sure they're recognized. But just, Representative, this is a lot of volunteers are stepping up, and I'd like to recognize the people who are helping us. So let's get those final. We've learned a lot. We get those final pieces in place, and that's a good segue now. Can Stephanie, can you just maybe put up there's a little issue tracker. I'm going to not go through the complete schedule, but I think if you go off to the left, you'll see something called issue tracker. Up top, keep going. Issue tracker list. Yeah. So, parking utilization study. What do we know?
We have a draft.
Excellent.
So I have that in my email. It hasn't gone through a final review by staff, and I'm maybe getting these backwards, but I know I have both the EV draft, study draft, and the parking utilization draft in hand. And Mr. Woolston will be part of that review, but he's not back until later in the month, and then we'll have a final.
Beautiful. Okay. I envision the idea will be that'll be an informational piece for David's group to incorporate in their overall community plan for making sure we have adequate EV infrastructure. It'll probably bounce back, but we do need that piece is critical, and we with great anticipation look forward to our access to that.
Yeah, the report's interesting. At least the draft is interesting, looking at the various lots. And so they did a nice job sort of mapping out the spaces that are used and the frequency with which they're used. And there are some spaces that have a 99% vacancy rate, and then just a couple spaces away, it's a significantly lesser vacancy rate. And just interesting the way people use lots.
Yeah, and just to be complete, so this is to inform multiple potential actions that we could take, right? And so obviously putting an EV charger is of primary concern to you, but these are also, impervious surfaces that we could replace with something green that is more aesthetically beautiful, has better drainage. So there's and that's just another one possibility reuse that is important to the bigger picture of what our best use of space is. So I didn't want us to get hyper focused on every available space will be transitioned to an EV. I don't see that happening, but we are counting on your team to make make sure we have the adequate dispersion, serving the right communities. Those sorts of things will be factors in the study results. So,
and the utilization also, to the extent that people get upset about the inconvenience that there may be because the yeah, the parking space is being taken up by a charger, and there's no vehicle charging at that moment when I want to park there. I think the utilization indicates that there's certainly some space,
Right.
such that it would not be such an inconvenience.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right. And I think we already did updates for everything else on the list. I'm not going to go through the project or master plan item by item, mostly because most of the people who would be relevant to comment on those are not here tonight. So I will just, the only other update I would like to see from the transportation task force is non-pecuniary incentives for incentivizing EVs and alternative fuel vehicles. So, I mentioned a few examples of just dedicating parking spots potentially, or deferring parking fees for spaces that, if you had an EV, these sorts of things, dedicating parking spots for EV only, even if they didn't have a charging station. I want to make sure we are using all available sort of incentives we can think of to promote our goal, right, of encouraging EV uptake. I don't think they need to be constrained by access to a charging station. So let's continue to think more broadly about ways we can incentivize the uptake. That these are things that the council can deliberate and adjust how we structure our public lots and public and metered parking on the streets. I always bring up the example of how the biggest incentive in the DC area for EV purchasing was access to the HOV lanes. It wasn't even weighted against the influence of the $7,500 federal tax credit. To access the HOV lanes dominated this was peer-reviewed research. So we need more
traffic here.
Maybe like air traffic is fine. There was an unusual number of topics related to infrastructure and climate action at the PML summit, which I got to attend. I was able to get, I think, some good technical advice to Jared on things involving energy efficiency and new ways of financing retrofits that are actually being enabled by the new federal legislation. So I'm optimistic that will be very informative, particular to our municipal ops plan that he's developing. And new information is coming every day about the language, the rules of using these funds. With that, I'll open up any last comments?
Can somebody introduce me to the school board?
Yep. Sure.
School district?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just an email.
Yeah, we can make. I can
Colleen or
yeah, I'd probably Colleen and then copy Paul.
nothing else. This meeting's adjourned.